You're listening to Cowley's Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops. Hello, you wonderful, wonderful people, and thank you for listening to the Cowley's Instructor Podcast. So I'd just like to mention, if you're listening to this before Friday the 17th of November, we are currently running a raffle for children in need. So if you head over to my personal Facebook page at Philip Cowley, or if you just want to send me a message, I'll be able to send you a link to how to sign up to that. And we've got some great prizes. We've got 14 top trainers offering Zoom sessions, and it's only £5 to enter. So if you're listening before Friday, please head over and get signed up to that raffle. As always, if you want to find me, you can head over to theinstructortrainer.com, or you can head over to Facebook and find me at Cowley's Instructor Training. So we've got a great episode for you today with Bob Morton. Bob, just doing what Bob does, is being awesome and hitting out wealth of knowledge. So we've got loads and loads of great content for you to listen to today. We find out a little bit more about Bob and how he became a driving instructor. Randomly, we discuss flat earthers and how they definitely would be the sort of people that get the bite first before the gas. And we move on to our next competency, was the practice area suitable. Bob does a great presentation on this. If you're listening on the audio, Bob did use a map during his presentation. I have posted that on the socials, so go find that, but you can just listen along and get the point anyway. We also talk about the national standards, and we're talking about designing learning programs, so we dig into that a little bit. And if you wait till the end, you can get Bob's top tip for driving instructors. Enjoy the show. So welcome, Bob Morton, and I've used your full name there. I've been referring to you as Bob across several podcasts, and so I'm feeling like you're getting that sort of kind of Cher status where you say Bob and everyone knows who it is. But yeah, welcome.
Yeah.
Well,
if you'd said Prince, I can live with that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, go for that.
I'm only kidding.
So yeah, welcome. Let's have a little bit about you, Bob. I've obviously heard quite a lot of your like podcasts and video content. And what I kind of want actually is your origin story. So a bit like in Marvel. So I've seen all the main movies, and I kind of want the Bob Morton origin story. So
which rock did I crawl out from under? Is that the...
Yeah, basically. So how did you start off as an instructor? Like, what were you doing before that? How did that come about?
Well, interesting. I was a train driver, and I'd started life as a mechanic. Got sick of that and thought I was in a workshop in the winter and thought I can't do this for the rest of my life. So I took a job as a bus driver, as an interim. I thought that'll be a laugh. So they were advertising, "Oh, you come along to us and we'll get you through your test and you can come work for us." So that'll be a right giggle. And ended up doing that for about 10 years and then transferred out to the Metro on Tyneside. And that job wore a joint out of my neck. Amazingly, cervical spondylitis. Constant holding of the dead man's handle and involuntary neck movements. Okay. So I was retired due to ill health, aged 29. And couldn't get another job, really. People would say, well, why'd you leave your last employment? Well, I was retired due to ill health, and they didn't want to know. So I figured self-employment was the only thing for me. And I couldn't make my mind up what to do. And the brass band that I played in at that time had an old boy in there, John Jones, bless him, who was a driving instructor. "Why don't you be a driving instructor?" he said. And I thought, yeah, I could probably do that. And that was 34 years ago. Oh, my God. 35 years ago. Jeez. And the rest of this year, as they say, is history.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think, again, I've sort of asked everyone else this sort of kind of like origin story, and I tend to ask instructors when I'm out and about as well and meeting them for the first time. And everyone seems to just fall into this job. Like it's no one's sort of goes into it like this is going to be my career. Like
it's my dream come true.
That'll do.
I
And
think it's because when you reach critical points in life, we see people. I used to sell driving instructor training courses for LDC, and you see people at key points. Generally, if they've been made redundant, turn 40, turn 50, turn 60, where they stop and they think, I'll take stock here. What do I want to do? Let's look at my options. I can communicate and I can drive. Driving instructor, I can do that. And so you're right, people just fall into it because it's something that's viewed as being easy.
yep.
And it's not until you've spent your life savings and you're 6 months into it, you realize that, am I ever going to get to the end of this driving law? God, do I really need to know all this shit?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I spoke to Emma on one of my episodes, and her mum is a driving instructor in Norway, and they have to do go to university and do a degree to become a driving instructor.
Yeah, I've just finished listening to that episode. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting if that was like how people would perceive driving instructor as a job. If that was the case to get into the role, it would be quite an intriguing way of doing it, whether it be taken more seriously. Not that it's not always taken seriously, but I think, like you said, people kind of go, I can drive, I can talk, I must be able to do that job. I mean, another way people sometimes come into the role is they've taught their kids.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, that was all right. I could do that to another 100 pupils. It'll be fine. Yeah. And then they realize that their kids were one of the easiest people they were ever taught to drive.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, you say that. my two daughters were a piece of cake.
My daughter, I'm teaching my daughter at the moment, and I'm finding it challenging, to be honest. She is she's not a talker, and even with me, she's very anxious, and she sort of doesn't like to give answers and stuff. And I'm good at getting answers out of my pupils.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it probably the hardest I've found a lot of pupils to get answers out of. She's driving really well, apart from when she smashed my car. But other than that, she's driving really well. First time.
But isn't it interesting though that somebody who's as well versed as you are in extracting stuff from people, there's a barrier there because she's your daughter. She wouldn't relate that with another instructor.
Yeah.
They often don't behave like normal pupils. That's part of the problem, isn't it? My lad would always say to me, "Are you sure, Dad? Are you sure? What do you mean I'm not sure? Of course I'm bloody sure. I'm not sure."
Yeah.
Doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that because he won't see you as this sort of kind of driver instructor that's done this for years. Just like, oh, Dad, he doesn't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So you joined the industry by mistake, sort of kind of thing.
Just about, yeah.
What happened then?
Well, joined LDC almost by mistake. The old boy who trained me said that, look, you come work for us for a while, you'll learn the ropes, and then you'll set up on your own. Now, I was lucky that he taught me quite a lot about how the business worked, because that's not the norm. Our industry is plagued by poor customer service, and it's not really our fault. It's because most instructors start life with a franchise. The franchise takes care of all of that. They eventually decide it's time to leave the franchise, but they haven't really got the customer service skills or all the other bits and pieces that you need to be able to run a business. And so we're kind of stumbling along, making an okay job of it, but it should be so much better. We aren't very good at customer service. You just got to look on Facebook and see the nonsense people post on there. And I often look at that and think, your pupils can see this, right? If you're on, I'm an ADI and I'm on Facebook, that's a public forum. People can see what you're writing. So the person you're slagging off here probably realizes it's them. It's just, and I've had this conversation once or twice with people say, well, I'm not bothered about him. It's not him that you should be bothered about. It's all his cousins and his nephews and his brothers, his sisters, and all his friends that are going to avoid you like the plague because you're that guy. And there should be a rule. I'm making a rule for myself, and I don't go on social media when I'm full of alcohol because it ends badly.
Yeah, not a good idea. So that's interesting though, the business side of it, because I suppose that inherently comes from the fact that you don't have to know that stuff to pass your Part 3.
That's right.
That's why the training sort of end up that way. But you would think, and I'm sure the big schools maybe touch on it, but just don't push it hard enough. But you'd think that they'd want you to have good customer services because you're working under their brand name. And so that's something I certainly do with my training with my guys, is that if they're going to work under my name, I want them to have that good customer service, because I don't want to be handling those phone calls.
Well, that's right. Complaints are difficult to deal with, and for a good while, for about 20 years, I handled the complaints at LDC, and we don't get that many, but they're still there to be dealt with. And at LDC, the new guys get a 3-day business course on this is how, okay, you threw your test now. Here's how it works in the real world. This is the real world things you're going to have to deal with. You're going to have to be able to deal with somebody phoning and complaining. So how are we going to answer that call? And simple stuff. Like saying, "Well, I'm sorry, you've got a problem with that." You're not apologizing for anything, but you've already said sorry, which makes the person at the other end of the phone wind their neck in a little bit, and then they're easier to deal with. So it's just that sort of stuff. I mean, I kind of fell into LDC almost by accident. I talked to the old boy who had trained me, and it was saying, "Yeah, it's probably time to move on." And I had a friend who had a musical instrument shop in Redcar Station Business Centre, and I was there visiting him, and LDC had just opened an office there. And I got chatting with Paul McCardle, who's the managing director, and I just thought there was possibilities here to perhaps become an instructor trainer, which interested me. And so I joined them.
So right from the start, you were thinking about becoming a instructor trainer. And so what kind of, because I remember when I started, I was 21 when I started, but so I didn't have these sort of kind of grandeur ideas. But what gave you that idea, like as soon as you became an instructor, that you wanted that progression?
Well, once I'd qualified, the school that John Jones had, he took on another PDI. And I'd done some observations of lessons and quite liked it. I thought, this is quite nice. And I found that I enjoyed that more than I enjoyed teaching learners, although I love teaching learners. But this was like, I thought, I could get into this. And so I did. So joined LDC with that in mind, but kind of got sidetracked a bit into the instructor support end of things, dealing with complaints and helping people to see that, the decisions they were making were perhaps not good for their business. And it's not just LDC thing here, it's your business too. So I did all the business training for the new instructors. I actually sell the courses. I headed the training department in the early 90s, and then took a sort of sideways step into, the customer care end of things, and then came back to running the training department. I can't even remember when that was. But finished my time there as director of training. Did just about every job in the company.
My guess this is around the time that the industry was swapping over from the PSTs to. Is that right?
Yeah.
Because I remember.
Yes, I was heavily at 2013. That's a timely reminder when the new criteria came out, and we're sitting down looking at that, and I started to put modules together to take care of that. So they give us that document in, I think it was October 2013, and the test came in April 2014, and we were promised a follow-up document to the examiner guidance, which never appeared.
Still waiting. One day.
Yeah. You think?
Yeah. So when you joined LDC, how big was LDC at that point? Because it sounds like you quite quickly went towards management style roles.
Yes. Yeah. Well, my franchised instructor number is 49.
Okay.
And they have 500 now. So
okay.
But yeah, it was just chatting with Paul and just some interesting conversations with him. He talked to us all one day about how did we feel about doubling our profit. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. But I don't fancy doing double the hours. Well, of course, you don't have to do double the hours, do you? Because your fixed costs are in the first bit. So it's, generally, if you're doing 40 hours a week, your profit's in the last 10. So if you want to double your profit, you only need to get to 50 hours a week. I stuck with the franchise because it always made it worthwhile for me, because the franchise fee wasn't high. But it meant that at the time I was easily able to manage 30, 35 hours a week. But the extra 5 to 10 hours back then were very difficult to get your hands on, because we were all cutting each other's throats and there wasn't enough work to go around. So the franchise topped mine up. So that I just saw that as extra profit. Yes, they were taking a percentage of that, but it was still profit that I wouldn't have had. So that's not the normal way to think about it, I understand. But so I just got involved in lots of conversations with Paul, and he then, he saw that I was quite affable and I'm, a reasonable speaker. Did I fancy doing some selling? Maybe, I don't know. How would that work then? And so I've just got involved in tons of different things. And I owe Paul a lot, Paul McCardle that runs LDC. It's just, he saw the potential in me and offered me the opportunity to develop. I also count myself as extremely fortunate that I was paid to sit at a desk week after week after week and studying all this stuff and looking at the national standard and all the criteria for the exam and putting together like totally geeky spreadsheets that point out what the important boxes are in the form. That if your core competencies aren't in place, you're still not going to pass. It's that simple. If you're not able to see it, sort it, and suss it and sort it, you're never going to get through. So those core competencies still exist, but it's in a much more client-based way. So the learner has to. I'm telling you here, you know all this, but it's that the learner has to come up with the idea. It's a bit like being married, isn't it? You've got to get the other person to think it was their idea.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree. It's those core comps are definitely run massively throughout the 17 comps. So I like the fact they use comps twice. It's very confusing. So you joined LDC, took over by the sounds of it. It's just an interesting story because I think actually a lot of people go through what I would say is the traditional maybe driving instructor route, start with a franchise, go solo, and then just stick with that. Maybe then start taking up, I suppose my story actually taking on instructors and building your own franchise, and that kind of feels like the traditional driving instructor story. And I love that like people have different ways of doing it, and it sounds like you've kind of you've gone through the sticking with a franchise, working your way through that, and it might have been a different story for you if you'd have gone solo early on and maybe not had that platform to do that sort of extra training and like you say, being paid to sit and read all this information, which I just do for fun.
That's right. But it's to have the time and to put the serious effort into looking at that and analysing it in the tiniest details and the chance to experiment with stuff and think, well, would this work? What about this? How about that? I ended up being the guy that people came to when they'd been twice and they're at the last chance saloon. So under that kind of pressure, you've got to make sure it works because it's somebody's livelihood. It is really important. So it was working out what it was that we needed to do just to get them through. I wasn't bothered about whether it was an A, whether it was a B. There's more than 31 points. That's all I was interested in. We were aiming for 51 all the time, but I said to a guy, been working with a guy recently, and he got through, decent score, but he's not happy with the score now. I said, you would have given your left testicle for 31 this morning. Yeah. And now you're not happy with it. Get a grip.
Yeah, a pass is a pass, and then
absolutely
from that day onwards, now carry on working to be better the next time, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very lucky that I had all these opportunities at LDC. I didn't say it at the time. I just sort of fell from one role to the next, really, as the company needed me. And especially in the early days when to be fair, the company was struggling, but like all new companies for cash flow and stuff and all manner of things. Like I'm driving up to Aberdeen to finish some training off because we'd fallen out with a trainer in that area. And there was nobody else to do it. Can you just pop up to Aberdeen and finish this guy's Part 3 training, Bob? Pop up to Aberdeen.
Pop is not the right word there, is it?
Not really, no. Good fun, though. Good fun.
So moving on, so then you obviously finished with LDC and then went solo, I suppose.
Well, I planned on I had really planned on retiring. We had COVID was horrific. we had a lot of training license holders that got nothing from the government, nothing at all, and 94 quid. They were harrowing times. That was hideous. And I used to run a Zoom every Monday morning, 3 Zooms, one for the trainers, one for the PDIs, and one for the instructors. And by PDIs, I mean the training instructors. I don't mean those on a training license. Just for clarification, I know you know the distinction, but just in case there's anybody listening who doesn't. You're a PDI as soon as you're in the system. But guiding the company through that time was something I was glad to do, and threw my heart and soul at it. But by God, it wore me out. It really did wear me out. Bringing that level of positivity every Monday, and I'd nearly be zombie at the end of it. It was just like, Jesus, how long was this going to go on? So once we got through it and we got to the other side of it, I said, no, it's. I was 65 then. It's time. Now, I didn't get my pension until I was 66, but I thought, I'll maybe just do 1 or 2 bits and pieces. And then it's gone nuts. Chris Benstead introduced me to somebody at the, I'm sure you know the story. He introduced me to somebody at the expo and went, oh, this is Bob Morton. He used to be a big name in the industry. Wait a minute, what do you mean? And went, I didn't mean it that way. But anyway, I've taken that now and I own it.
Yeah.
And I was chatting to Chris about it a little bit, and I think he's right. I think I'm more well known now than I was then, because I think at LDC I was sort of almost institutionalized, but I just focused all of my attention on just the people within the circle of LDC. Didn't really concern myself with people outside of it. I mean, I kept up to date with what was going on, but I just worked in that insular world, really.
Yeah, I suppose you didn't need to, did you? Really, in that you had your role. You weren't trying to put yourself out there to other people because you had your LDC work. So yeah, it's interesting that. But then it's interesting that you had that role and yet still were known, if that makes sense, because I don't necessarily.
The videos, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, you did the videos. Yeah, I remember watching. I've watched those videos. So
there's a whole story there as well.
And I think at that point, there wasn't really anybody else doing that sort of content. Like
Blaine was doing some Part 3 stuff.
His was more paid for, wasn't it? So it was a paid page, whereas yours was just out there on YouTube.
Well, it was never meant for public consumption, It was just going to be like internal video because we knew about coaching, we were interested in it. Well, actually, that's not true. If I'm going to be totally honest, we weren't interested in it. Paul McCardle, the MD, was interested in it, brought it to me and said, what do you think of this? And I said, looks like a bunch of shit to me, man. That looks like the latest fad from the DVSA, and they're going to get sick of it and move on, same as they always do. And he went, oh, you don't believe that, Bob. Come on, have a look. So begrudgingly, I looked at it and I thought, well, how are they supposed to learn if I'm not teaching them? That's ridiculous. That's stupid. That's how people learn, through instruction. He said, well, yes, they do. But have you considered they might learn another way? No, I hadn't. So we began this big experiment, just trying to get things to happen without instruction. Well, when you make your living instructing, working without instruction becomes hard. And the only thing I could think of was to say to the learner at the time, the first one, Bobby Jo Turner, bless her, I used to just say, well, what do you think? And on the day of our test, I'm driving her home and she said, I'm not as stupid as people think I am, Well, how are you? How's that? She said, well, I've taught myself to do this. Taught yourself to do it, have you? She went, yeah. It's still up there. Can you have a look? She went, yeah. She said, whenever I ask you a question, you just ask me what I think. And I've had to work it out myself. Like, oh. And then she said, I've got a friend who's learning to become a driving instructor. And I've told him it's dead easy. Just don't answer people's questions. Now, it was the belief in coaching didn't come from training her up to that point. It came afterwards when I rang her to talk about, maybe doing something else now, like Pass Plus. Don't need it. She says, I've taught myself to do it like I did when I was learning to drive. And she's found a level of self-respect from that process by being at the heart of everything and being shown that she is actually quite smart and that she can work stuff out for herself. So it was that side of it that really started to interest me. But the videos for it were only meant to be internal, and they got accidentally left live. And then suddenly realized there's lots of people watching them, so we just started publishing them. So they're not really what they're not representative of how I coach. They're part of the journey, and it's the interesting thing when I look at them now. The early ones anyway. The interesting thing is just how quickly she learns in the absence of instruction, and you think this is why school and mum and dad do so well, because they're not on that case all the time. In fact, school and mum and dad are doing better than we are. There's all sorts of arguments about why that might be, why they might have a 2% better pass rate than we do. And instructors will always say, oh, yeah, it's because instructors are working with them too. It's time to have a look at that and think, is there something to learn from this? And I think there is. We need to interfere less and help learning happen more. Because it's just, oh, there's the hammering. Bang, bang. We have builders in for anybody who can hear the hammering in the background.
There's two. I was going to jump in on something else, and then you said about parents, and I wanted to jump in on that. We'll go for the first thing that I was going to talk about. So I'm intrigued by this sort of, because I think I went through the same sort of kind of transformation, whereas I was like, I'm an instructor, that's how I got taught. It was tell. And I'm sure there was elements of coaching in there just because I'm naturally like that, but I didn't know it. I didn't know it as coaching. And you obviously had this sort of kind of phase where you were like, no, that's ridiculous. How are they going to learn if I don't tell them?
Impossible. How could that even happen? Inconceivable.
Yeah. And then
quote from my favorite movie of all time.
So then you made this transformation, but it sounds like the way you made this transformation was giving it a go. Yes. And not giving up after the first time you asked a pupil a question and they said, I don't know. You gave it a go and you worked with it, and actually you can see that in the videos, that you're learning as you go with it. And I think you even actually, I'm sure on one of those videos, you even explain it to the pupil, like, let's give this a go, see what happens, sort of thing. Yeah. You brought the pupil into the process. And I think maybe is a barrier for a lot of instructors, that they have that initial like, oh, that doesn't work for me. And they should just give it a go, but give it a go for long enough, so that you can get better at it, and so that also you can see the results of it going well. Would you agree with that?
Well, 100%. We dip our toes in the water, barely enough time for them to get wet. It's, you need to get in there and have a good paddle and set it up nicely so that it can work. The way that we did it with Bobby Joe Turner was silly, because I found myself in safety critical situations that I had no real knowledge of what was just about to happen, because nothing was set up. She'd had no instruction. Thinking back, that was probably a silly thing to do, but we're just discovering stuff. And I'm pretty quick-witted with it, and with the jewels and such. I'm in quick, but it's not an ideal construct. So you need to set things up so that it's easy, so you can gain success. So start with maneuvers, start your coaching process there. But I do think it's amazing that when you look at some of the things that have come back from the conversations with them, like Bobby Joe Turner, our first attempt at reverse parking, I said, okay, scale that then for me. If 1 was just dreadful and 10 was as good as it could be, where would you place yourself? 10, she says. Now, if you're a coach, you're supposed to let that go. But I was thinking, that was nowhere near a 10. There was no observation at all. So I thought, well, I'm not allowed to challenge. Everything I'd read about that said, you're not allowed to challenge the number they give you. I said, okay, what are you basing that on? She just turned me and said, nobody's dead. Therefore, it's a 10. Okay, fair enough. I said, okay, let's break it down into those component parts. And I think it was this shackling of me, because normally I'd have been piling in there, telling her why it was good and why it wasn't. I said, okay, let 3 component parts: control, observation, and accuracy. Scale those for me. And of course, she gives herself a 10 on control and a 10 on accuracy and a 2 on observations. That's why 2. She wasn't really looking. That's why weren't you looking? I could see you were. From the mouths of babes and innocence. And the other favourite one was with Danielle, who was a joy to teach. She said, I dual braked her. And we pulled up round the corner and have a little chat. Let's see have a chat and see what we're going to learn from that. I said, okay, obviously that was me on the brake there. What do you think made me do that? She said, is it because you're old and nervous? Yeah, that's pretty much it, yeah. But let's scrape the surface of that a little bit. I mean, there was a lovely conversation that comes, and I think it's just a case of being open to it and not wanting to jump in. But we feel that we need to jump in because that's what we're being paid for. I'm being paid to instruct. Now I don't think that at all. I think, well, I'm earning my money here by creating an environment where learning can happen. And if I do that and I get out the way, this big storm of learning will happen. And my job is just to help them get the balance right between challenge and ability. You know, if the challenge is too high and the ability is low, well, they become, disheartened. If the ability is low and the challenge is too high, have I done that the wrong way around? Then they can become frustrated and bored. So it's just helping them in effective goal setting, really. And people think that coaching is just about letting people do whatever they want. Well, no, you would challenge and go, no. The classic one, isn't it? So, what do you want to do today? Motorways. It's only lesson number 2. Yeah, but that's what I want to do. Oh, well, that's what I did that because I'm being client-centered. No, you're being client-led. So our job would then be, of course, to challenge and say, well, okay, how fast do you travel so far? 7 miles an hour we got to do yesterday. So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and I'm a total convert now, of course, where I started the whole thing just not believing any of it was possible, that it was just a load of hoping.
It's and I find that fascinating because, like, obviously you are massively a convert and preach it to everyone. Ad
nauseam.
But I just love the fact that you came from, it wasn't always that way, if that makes sense. You definitely didn't have that. Just moving on to the parent thing, because I was intrigued by this, because you said, what do they do better than we do? And I've always been intrigued by this because I am also of the belief, and I get that instructors have this, that their pass rate is better, but also a lot of those people who are going in their own cars have had driving lessons as well. They aren't. I would say it's probably rare that people are just purely taught by their parents. But there is a they do have a better pass rate when they take which means they're having private practice. So probably the question is, what is it about private practice that helps them have that sort of higher pass rate, do you think, that over than just learning with instructors? And therefore, what can instructors do to match that if a pupil doesn't have that private practice?
It's a great question. It's quite a complicated one. I think what's happening during this private practice for mom and dad is the learner is tying up loose ends for themselves. Because learning happens when we make a connection, as you know, when we make a connection between what we know and what we don't know. And what we know is contained in our little map of the world that's inside our head. Everything we've ever experienced, good, bad, indifferent, everything we've ever imagined, tasted, smelt, everything we've seen somebody else experiencing, it's all held in there. And when we're faced with a new input that we've not had before, we compare that to everything throughout our life that's broadly similar in a millisecond. And that's where the learning happens. Now, you need some clear blue thinking time for that to happen. And it's more difficult for that to happen when you're under a barrage of instruction. Where if you're just left to your own devices, you'll work it out fairly quickly. And I think that's the secret. It's mom and dad are hands off because they're scared to be hands on. If they weren't scared to be hands on, they'd have the same issues that we have, and their pass rate would be identical. But it'll probably be less because it's not professional instruction. But I think it's that clear blue thinking time that the learner's allowed, and they're just able to just go through some stuff. Let's just go round and round and round, and eventually it clicks for themselves. It's something that the industry always used to say was that, oh no, you'll struggle a little bit to begin with, but then one day it'll all click together. And I've since realized that it all clicks together in the mind of the learner. It's not to do with the instruction that's being given. It's just the learner finally makes sense of stuff.
Yeah, so it's almost like in the old way where it was just all instruct, instruct, instruct. There was always that phrase of you learn to drive, you start learning to drive after you pass your test, which I absolutely hate because I'm like, well, what are you paying me for? But maybe that used to happen because that was suddenly they were in the car and able to think because no one was chatting to them next to them. So they're similar to that sort of kind of the parent being quiet. So so for me it kind of comes down to this. And a phrase that one of our ADI examiner likes to use is empower the pupil. And I think that's what parents do unintentionally by shutting up. They empower them to take responsibility. And I think that's maybe where instructors not necessarily don't do, but maybe need to make it clearer to the pupil that they are taking responsibility, because pupils have this, like your story about your pupil not looking around because you were. And now obviously I'm not saying instructors should stop looking around when we're doing maneuvers, but we should be making it clear that it is their responsibility, because they see us differently and therefore rely on us. And then we need to kind of push them into that zone of don't rely on me, actually. And I think that's one thing. The other thing, and actually, to be fair, I've learned this recently teaching my daughter to drive, because we also, like, for example, last night we drove like maybe 40 miles to another city at night, did a big roundabout that she'd never done, like 5 lanes, did a big massive roundabout that's similar to one that we have local, but it's new. And so we had to apply those skills that we've been learning. It was night, it was busy. It was a big fire at this place. There was a lot of traffic. And she drove it brilliantly, but it's not something I would do with a lesson. If that makes sense. But maybe that is something that I should try and, like, maybe not drive at night on a Sunday evening, someone, because I've got a life, but but maybe more of that could be incorporated. I think it's too often we go into, let's go and do roundabouts, let's go and do parallel parking, but actually let's go to another city, let's go to your work, let's go to your grandma's house or whatever, and incorporate more of that sort of kind of driving.
It would be, I mean, they started this model in Australia where learners had to do 200 hours with their parents. Well, they had to have 200 hours signed off. And generally it was accepted that the parents were going to do that. They've since dropped it because the parents were signing the hours off without doing them. Why would you do that? But anyway, that's an interesting concept, because you could be working with those parents and say, okay, here's what we're working on currently. It would be really useful to me if you could just focus in this area, and I'll even do a little route map for you, and just keep repeating this until they're happy that they've got it. And we could build better partnerships with the parents, because at the minute parents are just seen as a pain in the backside by instructors. They're just, I've got one. Everybody says, "Oh, I've got one." You know, he's always on the phone to me saying, "When's my daughter going to put in for a test?" I only took 3 lessons, and well, maybe you did only take 3 lessons. Maybe he's a natural driver. And why is that not an okay question to ask? You know, it's like when people phone up and say, "Oh, I've got my test next week. Can you help me?" If you can't help, just say no. Why would the learner know that it's not okay to do that? It's just
the story I always use is, if I needed, like, you've got builders in right now, or if I needed some sort of tradesman, I don't know that industry. I don't know the demands on that industry at the moment. So I ring up and I'm like, "Can you pop round tomorrow?" And they might be,
no.
Yeah, they're onto, I don't know, electricians. I'm an electrician on Facebook group, and they're probably laughing at me.
Yeah. I had this pillock ring me yesterday.
I know, exactly, and I don't know the industry, but we need to remember that when people ring us, that they don't know our industry, and so it's a genuine question. And yeah, maybe just explain the scenario to them and say, this is what's happening, this is what you need to do, this is how I can help you, or I can't because I'm too busy, but maybe try this person or something. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying right early on about that customer service, and being able to have those conversations with people. I think that would link that to the parent thing. That's a customer service thing, and actually by incorporating the parent into the conversations and the lessons. Bear in mind that they might be paying for the lesson, so in effect they are your customer. They're certainly the one that's going to go and tell all their friends who have got kids as well. So bring them into the conversation, get them in the car, particularly if they're teaching the pupil to drive as well. Get them in the car so they can see some of the conversations you're having, see the standards that you're looking for. They can ask questions in the moment, and it really sort of kind of helps that conversation go.
Who knows, you might even have an impact on their driving.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you'll undo some of the learning they've done since they passed the test.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, I explain that as well from not just a pupils, helping the pupil and helping the parent. Again, it's a business thing as well, because everyone recommends the driving instructor their kid pass with. Like, that's just the go-to. It makes sense. But can you imagine the conversation with a group of friends and somebody says, "Oh, Johnny's learning to drive next year. Who should I go with?" And everyone kind of names the person they went with. But then one person goes, "Well, actually, I sat in the back with my instructor." One, you're already onto a winner with that first sentence, and he was amazing, and I saw it. Like, who are they going to go with? Like,
That's right.
They've got evidence, so it's a great business thing to do as well. Sitting and letting parents.
It's funny how customer service is a relatively new thing in the driving instructor industry. The guy that took me for lessons was a friend of my dad's, and I'd gone out for one lesson with my dad, and it was a disaster. So he said, "Right, I'll get Charlie to sort you out." The clue was in the phrase that he used, "I'll get Charlie to sort you out." And this guy used to batter me. He used to lay into me. If I made a mistake, he'd punch me. If I made the same mistake again, he'd punch me harder. He once took my watch off me and put it under the back wheel on a hill start. But I didn't bother because he was doing exactly the same to all my mates. So it was just accepted. That's just how it was. But I think it also speaks to, you know, building curriculums and stuff. Who's going to be involved? You know, are you thinking of taking the child out at some point? Or you might be speaking with the husband, the wife, the boyfriend, the girlfriend. Okay, so how about we have a chat about what we can do and how we can make that easier for you? Because I know you're probably worried about it, but we can set some practice things up that'll help you ease yourself into it. And do you want to come and sit in on some lessons beforehand? Blah, 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 blah. And I've done that before. And as you were talking about earlier, I've had people then become interested and become driving instructors as a result of it. And I got that work too. So it's just, it's interesting, but we need to be just the same as we're modernizing in terms of the, you know, the way that we teach now, the way that we're helping educate the youngsters. You know, we're starting to catch up with the rest of education and training who learned these lessons a long time ago. We really are the last bastion of telling people what to do, and it works. And in the hands of some practitioners, it works better than others, but it's nowhere near as powerful as coaching. Nowhere near. The learning doesn't resonate as deep or for as long.
Yeah,
I reckon. So off on a tangent there.
No, I 100% agree. So moving on then, actually, let's move on and start to talk about our competencies. So we are on to number 3 in the competency list. So were the practice areas suitable? I'm just going to let you take it away here, Bob.
Okay. Well, this is a big one for me, and I think if you get this one right, it makes getting a lot of the other ones right easier. When I speak to people who are preparing for standards checks and part 3s, and we get onto the subject of routes, they've generally organized a route that leaves the test center, goes through some stuff, and arrives back at the test center 45 minutes later. That's it. Tick, job done. And I say, okay, so what's today's subject? And I say, how much of that route are you working on stuff that's not part of today's lesson? And they're always saying the same, well, quite a bit, but it's inevitable. Is it? Is it really inevitable? Or have you just not put enough thought into it? It's always the latter. Always. You can't find places like that in my area. Yes, you can. You've just not looked hard enough. So I like to use, did that work? Do you see the map?
I do. And just for those listening, I'm going to share the photo of this so that you can have a look at it while we chat about it.
So if I'm looking at roundabouts, I want to isolate roundabouts. And on my roundabout route, I don't want other things that I've not already dealt with. The likes of traffic lights, pedestrian crossings, that kind of stuff. So I start mine here on Rook Hill Road. For those of you who are not looking at the video but are looking at the map, you'll find it on the right-hand side. And I come up to the roundabout at the top here near Chequerfield Lane School and turn left. So I'm then coming down the main road, turning off, doing a T-junction, and I'm back on Rook Hill Road again. I've done one roundabout. We'll then probably stop for a review. How was it? What went well? What didn't go well? And then I might then go straight ahead. But I've got the ability to get back to that roundabout really quickly. So if that's going well, I might come around this way to this other roundabout. This big one in the middle is a bit more complicated, so I'm not tackling that yet. That's the next step. That will be the next challenge. So I've got the ability to get back and forward to these very quickly, and there's no pedestrian crossings, there's no traffic lights, there's nothing to deal with that I've not already dealt with. We'll then perhaps go further forward and tackle this big one. But let's assume, that's assuming it's going well. But let's assume it's not gone well, and we're going to have to take a backward step. Well, that will be crossroads for me, which are here, here, and here. You'll see there's 3 crossroads on the map. So I can take a backward step to that. And let's assume that it goes really, really badly because the learners are freaked out because there's an examiner in the back now and they can feel the pressure. And I might need to go back to basic junctions, which I can do here. If I need to go further back, bottom left of this map, there's a little beginner area that I could use. So I can take that backward step very easily. And I've got everything within my control. If things are going not according to plan, I have options. So my lesson doesn't have a route that covers the whole lesson. It has a set of practice areas. And it's interesting that the DVSA describe it thus. Did the practice areas, were they suitable for what you're working on? And do you have other areas close by? Because it will not always go right, because that's just the nature of things, isn't it? So it's really thinking about how much of any, and here's an exercise for the boys and girls to do this week. Here's something to try. Your next lesson, make note of how much of the time you were dealing with what you're supposed to be working on and how much of the time was spent dealing with other stuff. Now, the reason that that's a bad idea is because you've already got enough plates spinning on a standards checker at part 3. You don't want extra plates to spin from pedestrian crossings and other things that may or may not go right for you. So that little area that I showed you on there, it's very rare that there's any meet situations there. But I can go to where there's meet situations a little bit further west of that map. So there's everything I need. Now that as it happens, that's Pontefract, which you'd think would be designed by a driving instructor. It's so perfect in everywhere. But you can find these areas, and it's an exercise we do with it's an exercise that LDC do with their PDIs. Go and find places to do these lessons and send the map in. Let your trainer have a look at it, and let your trainer comment on it. So it's really thinking about that. And what order will you do these things in? Because where you live can determine the order in which things happen. I mean, if you lived in Milton Keynes, well, lesson number 2 is roundabouts, isn't it? So it's because that's all there is down there.
Yeah.
So you might have to tailor it to where you live. So it's really important that we put the time and thought into showcasing well for exam, which is the same thing as churning out end product during a lesson. Has something happened as a consequence of the environment? Of the environment that you've set up. That was quite short. It's about that being quite so short.
No, it's interesting, and I love this idea of like I suppose having contingency plans available to you, so you can move that lesson up and down depending on where you're going. So yeah, really nicely succinctly way of putting it. Another bit of this competency, and it does leak a little bit into where opportunities taken to clarify learning outcomes. But I think it also ticks this box as well, and will get marked on this box, is if you're not using the area appropriately as well. So, for example, obviously, my guess is I don't know how close that area is to the test center.
It's 5 minutes away.
Right, but for part of that would be the 5-minute drive there, utilizing that area, because to prep yourself for the meat of the lesson when you get there. And I can see that happening quite a lot when with PDIs and ADIs as well, actually thinking about it, where you you don't utilize the junctions on the way to prep yourself for the routine that you're going to be doing when you get to the roundabouts. So I think that's quite important as well. And maybe also using stuff on, like you said, there's no pedestrian crossings or anything like that, but again, if there was, use it to run through MSPSL. Use an example that I quite often see happening is moving off and stopping lesson and talking about checking your blind spot and like, oh, what if there's a junction there, what if there's a junction there, and then the examiner says, put a bloody junction there.
Stop opposite one, yeah. Just stop here next to this lamppost, yeah. And I think it's an area that we fall down on big style now, even more so now. That I was chatting to somebody again just recently. I said, and so what did you do on the way to the area? What do you mean? Well, what did you work on? Well, nothing. How long did it take you to get there? Well, it was only 5 minutes. So if it's only 5 minutes there and it's only 5 minutes back, that's a quarter of your test time gone there. And if you're doing nothing, if you're the examiner, what would you think? It's a waste of bloody time, isn't it? I think the way I like to look at these exams is it's not a test of your ability to instruct. It's a test of whether they're happy to let you charge for it. And in order for you to be able to charge for it, you've got to do something different to the school of mum and dad, which is trundling around fixing some stuff and letting other stuff go, which is what most of the lessons I observe are. We let so much go. You think, well, why are you not pouncing on that? Well, that's not what we're working on today. Yeah, but that was safety critical, mate. And then we took that bloody car door off, never mind the door mirror. Just, are you not going to talk about that? Well, yeah, but we're not working on that. Jesus. Okay. So we have to really think about this. And it really is about, are things happening really quickly and really efficiently as a result of your input? Are you enabling this to happen? And there must be end product. If you're trundling around, keep mentioning the mirrors and keep mentioning the fact that they're too fast, keep mentioning the fact that they're too wide, then you're not doing your job. Stuff should be fixed. It should be fixed quick. Somebody said to me the other day, yeah, but you can't do that with all learners. No, mate, you can't do that with all learners. It can be done with all learners. You just got to find a way. What you're doing is not working. So if you keep on doing what you've been doing, you'll get what you just got. So you've got to change. So it's, in the past, the industry just looked at people who were slow learners. That's how they were described, because they didn't fit the model that was being applied to them. But the reality is, it's us. We're the problem.
Yeah.
I think people aren't learning the way we're teaching. It's start teaching the way people learn.
So looking at the just on this conversation as well, like utilizing the areas, and I love that little map. It looks like, I quite often when I go away to places, I'm driving around, I'm like, I'd love to teach here.
I do the same. How sad are we?
I know. Everyone else is looking at the countryside. I'm like, oh, what a roundabout.
Yeah.
But utilizing the area you're in, and quite often, like sort of like you talked about a safety critical incident there, and maybe needing to go and sort that out. But again, I think maybe instructors have this sort of kind of think that we have to go back to the exact same place to sort it out. And that then takes too long. And now we've spent, I don't know, 10 minutes driving around. And by the time we get back to it, we've forgotten what happened in the first place. And
that's why I like this short circular route, so that it's never going to take me more than a minute or two to get back to the scene of the crime. And it's much better if you can deal with the exact same situation, but you don't have to, obviously. But I've got everything in close proximity, so I don't have to wander. But if you've got a 40-minute route, then it might be very difficult to get back to where you're going. So it's some time thinking about, for me, some time thinking about this short, repetitive route where you've got multiples of the same thing or back to a roundabout from a different direction, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that building those small little loops that you can repeat, but remembering that you can practice the skill of whatever happened on the other stuff on the way there back, even if you are going back to it, that you can build that in. Maybe you can also, like it sounds like on your route, that you could flip it round and go the other way and then let them experience that from the other driver's point of view, so you can see how you can manipulate the area you're in to go, this is how we're having that. You've taken that one tiny little moment on the lesson and then you've milked it for the next 20 minutes because you've got all the learning out of it.
Well, that's right. And it then also, affords you the opportunity to start looking at the upper levels of the GDE. Well, okay, how would this be if it was icy? How would it be if it was dark? What if there's a lot of traffic here? What if you had a load of your mates in the car making a lot of noise while you were trying to concentrate? What would you say to them? Who would tell them to shut up? What if they told you to shut up? What's your strategy? And the fact that you've actually already discussed it means that it's more likely to happen that way when it actually comes to it. So by these conversations happening in the car with us, we're hopefully influencing them in a very positive way going forward. And the people often say, "Oh, I want them to hear my voice for years to come." No, I want them to hear their voice for years to come, asking themselves, "What's my options here? What do I need to do here?" And really think their way through it. And I think that's a good way of thinking about what we're trying to do is that we're creating decision makers, not drivers. Good decision makers, because good decision makers are good drivers. Or rather, good drivers make good decisions.
I love that. I love the idea that it should be their voice that they're listening to not ours. I remember Lou talking about safe driving for life. So I want all my drive learners to be safe drivers. And I think it was Chris Spencer that told me this story. She got up and said, actually, no, what I want is my pupils to be able to choose to drive safely. So they need to know, but actually I want to have those conversations so they make the choice to, because actually a lot of times when people make errors out on the road, it's not because they can't do it properly. They've chosen to drive unsafely. They've chosen
nobody leaves the house thinking, right, I'm going to kill somebody here.
No, yeah, it's not a deliberate choice, but it's happens over time, doesn't it? Where I'll go a little bit faster, I'm in a bit more of a rush, whatever, and it's those conversations that they choose not to. I always, I'm going off on a massive tangent here, but I always remember a situation where my wife FaceTimed me, and my daughter had fallen in the park and smashed her face up, and there was blood all over her face. My wife was screaming, was panicking, and I was like, I will be there, I'm on my way. And I made a very conscious decision on that journey to drive safely, because I knew my heart rate was up, my adrenaline was kicked in, and it's very easy for me to be like zooming down the roads over the speed limit. I need to get there. But I made a very conscious decision. And I think that's what we're talking about, is like, have those conversations with pupils. Like, in this scenario, what would you do?
Absolutely. Because I mean, we all know there's no power on this earth that will prevent a 17-year-old male with a fresh license and his own car getting in it with all his mates in and driving it flat out. That's going to happen. What I'm never going to change that. There is no power on the planet that will be able to. But I might be able to make him think about when and where he does it. And that's the key thing, isn't it? That's the thing about the upper levels of the GDE matrix. It's having that thought process that thinks, yeah, that's not safe to do that here. I'll do it somewhere else, or I'll do it at another time. And it's that it does become the norm that you pass your test and then you learn to drive. Because what's happened traditionally is people pass the test and then they'll learn a different way of driving through experiencing what other people are doing. And that behavior, that driving too close to the vehicle in front, driving too fast, not indicating, becomes normalized because they see it so often. But if you've got the thought process in place where you can still think, well, I know why you should do that. I know why you shouldn't not signal. Too many negatives in that sense. So yeah, a little bit of a tangent, but it is all sort of related. It's all, we've got to make what we do relevant.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that moves us nicely actually on to talking about the national standards for driver rider training. Now, before we go on to this unit, I've heard you tell this story before about how you got up in a room full of trainers. And I'm just intrigued by that story because I sort of kind of paraphrased it on the last episode, but I'd love to hear
I was mortified. It was at Cardington. And I asked John Sheridan, can we have a quick show of hands? Who's read the National Standard for Driver and Rider Training? There was hardly any hands went up. I don't think. These are audit trainers? Oh my God. How? Now, I know, that if you said, the National Standard for Driver and Rider Training, people's eyes glaze over. Generally, people who haven't read it. There's some interesting stuff in here. And there's some stuff in here that's very relevant to a modern way of teaching. And it's, it's like, you see, you can be a coach by applying a coaching process, but you become a coach when you buy into it 100%. When you can't see any other way of doing it. Christian van Nieuwburg speaks about that in his book. Brilliant stuff. So we all need to become coaches. So it has to be part of who you are. Your way of being has to be right. And if you're coming from a totally instructional background, then your way of being is not right because you're assuming that you know better. And who says you know better? Should always be open to being tested. Should always be open to a challenge. If you can't face a challenge, then your standpoint isn't very strong.
Yeah. So, what's that book called?
Everything. I can't find anything in it. An Introduction to Coaching, I think.
Okay.
Christian van Nieuwburg.
I might pop a link in there because I'm sure there'll be people out there that will want to listen to it. I might use it for the book club actually. So let's have a chat.
I keep meaning to join you for one of those, but you keep having them on nights when I'm at Park Club.
Yeah, they are good fun, good conversations we have. So I 100% agree. I think I think this document maybe could have been written better. I think it was a missed opportunity. It's got great content, but it can be it's a bit DVSA. To be honest, is the way I would describe it. But that's kind of why I want to do this, because it allows us to have that conversation, which might pique the interest of someone to go and then read it. And I think actually this unit, which is designing learning programs, is a really good one to, like, obviously start at number one because it is number one, but like number one is a bit dull. It's a bit like the law and all that sort of kind of stuff. This one is about what we do in the car. So I think this one's a far more meaty topic. And I just want to read the first sentence on this one because it is crucial to what we do. And you've named a business basically after this sentence. So this unit uses a client-centered learning approach. It is about maximizing the learning by taking into account the status, prior experience, and particular needs of a learner. Is that not just what we do or should be doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's that done. Tick.
Yeah, so don't need to read the rest. So
that is what we should be doing. It is what we should be doing, but I can only speak for the lesson observations that I've done. And people send me video all the time from all over the place. It isn't what we're doing. It's what we try and do for our standards check, but it's not what we do in everyday work. It isn't what we do. We think it's okay to just put up a special show every once in a while and then pass our standard check, then go back to doing what we were doing before and believe somehow that justifies our position that the standards check is not fit for purpose. Well, it is. And it's fit for purpose because it's written by people who understand education and training, not the DVSA, by the way. There are those who used to work for the DVSA who will tell you they wrote it. No, they bloody didn't. People first wrote this. The DVSA had a team put together to implement it. That's not the same as writing it. So it's written by people who understand education and training. Now, this became apparent to me because as following on from the coaching stuff, we wanted to become an accredited centre at LDC. So I had to train to become an assessor, then a verifier, and I trained to become a teacher. That was hard work. Jesus. You think it's hard qualifying as an instructor? And it exposed me to a lot of different thinking. And education has been using coaching for ages. So they're kind of, you know, we miss a trick here because all these kids that come to us have already been coached while they're in school. So they're open to it. They might not like it, but they are open to it. And it must be geared around who the learner is. We must be applying teaching techniques and methodologies. I'm tired. I've been poorly, you know, that resonate with the learner. We must help learning to happen and not get in the way of it. So the only way you can be sure whether you're getting in the way or not all the time is ask, what did we do that you like? Anything I did that you didn't like? Now, eventually, they'll not tell you that anything to do with that to begin with, but eventually, once they trust you, they'll say, well, I would, the Claire's classic one on the LDC YouTube stuff. I asked her that. I said, what do we do that you like? Well, I like the way that we do this. Anything that I do that you don't like? She said, well, I would have never said anything, but since you brought it up, when I'm having my first attempt at something, could you just shut up? That's what I mean. She said, I need you to be quiet while I'm trying to concentrate. You don't want me to talk you through it? No, but that's how it works. Well, not for me. Your jibber jabber, she says, your jibber jabber is putting me off. Jibber jabber? I was offended. Jibber jabber. So I thought, right, you smarty pants, have a go on your own then. There's me expecting her to fall on her backside. Far from it. Nailed it first go. Oh. And then nailed it on every attempt subsequently. And the reason that happens is because she worked it out for herself. With all the experience that was inside her head, she'd compared those things she was doing with everything broadly similar in the rest of her life, got it all sorted out, filed it away for future retrieval, done. And a further conversation with her on the run into test. What do you want to work on today? Yeah, she would just have a bit of a drive around us. No, come on. You know that's not how it works. We want to work on we want specific things to work on. She said, I don't think I've got anything to work on, really, Bob. She said, I'm quite happy with it all. But you don't want to work on maneuvers, maybe? No. Are you sure? Yeah. So it's just, you know, what about this? No. So are you sure you don't want to work on? She said, do you think I need to work on maneuvers? I went, well, no. She said, what do you keep mentioning it for then? And I thought, why does she not want to work on maneuvers? Learners normally obsess about maneuvers. And she didn't want to work on maneuvers because she'd worked them all out for herself and she wasn't worried about it at all. I hadn't given her a list of things to remember because that's what driving instruction is. In its crudest form, it's a list of shit to remember. And if you want evidence of that, listen to the conversation in driving test center waiting rooms. Now, remember, but don't forget, that's all you hear. Remember what we said? If you get that roundabout there, don't forget. And what happens under pressure? Well, they forget. Then we come back and say, well, it's not fair that I'm being held to account for these triggers that happen on tests. It's not to do with me, that, isn't it? Isn't it? You're the one who's given them this list of shit to remember. If you stop doing that, they'll stop doing the stupid things on tests because they won't struggle to remember because they'll have worked it out for themselves. Now, less, I'm not saying it'll never happen, but it's much less likely to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually it should happen all the way through your training. But I think it shows the most on maneuvers. Like you brought maneuvers in there as that example. But I think maneuvers are one of those things where it really is a list of stuff to remember, and you're trying to like do, I don't know, when is it when do I do one turn? Is it when the wing mirror flashes at me or what?
And if that wasn't confusing, Facebook wouldn't be full of driving instructors asking how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, it's actually one of my favorite lessons is that first time reversing. And I just love they look at me and I'm just like, give it a go. And they're like, what? And it's, I love that moment where they do give it a go and work it out and tweak it. And then I don't necessarily, like you said, you don't necessarily have to teach it again because they've worked it out. Like we practice it, but it's their
Well, I
own
like to.
way.
I've sort of refined that a little bit more when I'm doing it now. I get them to imagine it first.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I stop them, if it's not going the way that we were expecting, I'll stop them and say, is this what you imagined? Or what's different about it? And it gives me a handy reference there. Oh, I'm a bit wider. Okay, what's your options for putting that right then? And I'm constantly working in the, well, what could you do about that? And that and that. So if we're making it all around the learner, it then doesn't make sense to me for us to overlay a curriculum on top of that. Why not put the curriculum together with the learner, whether that be a learner driver, whether that be a PDI, whether it be an ADI that we're working with? Okay, let's look at our program of events. Let's look at the things that we need to learn. There's our broader goal. We're going to learn all of that. That breaks up into a whole series of smaller goals. Now then, is there a logical order to this, do you think? And having them, and I think we used to think, I still think it's great. LDC have a curriculum for the learner drivers, and it really works well. But I think we sort of miss a trick, having the PDIs put that together for themselves and really think about it, because it's already sort of done for them. Now, we focus the attention in other areas, but are they really buying into that being the order if they've not put it together? Because if it's your idea, you're never going to turn your back on it. So I think and it speaks to this unit of the national standard that we have to have a curriculum, which is just a series of events, and it needs to be in a logical order. It needs to go from the simple to the complex, from component to whole, and particularly low risk to high risk. We can then have conversations about, well, what constitutes risk here? And if it's high risk, are you more, as the PDI, are you more or less likely to need to take control of that in the beginning? And what level of control? And how will you hand control over? So built into that curriculum are the conversations, you can just return to it all the time. They're all written out, okay, so let's look at where we are now. Who's managing risk here? What about at this level? What other stuff could you do at the same level here that's of the same sort of level of risk or the same level of effort required? Are there things that are similar? Does it break down even further into component parts? Well, it does for me, and this is somewhere else that we don't really do as good a job as we could. Changing gear without looking down, mastery of the clutch, and being able to steer with our eyes. Everything else is a combination of those three things. Why are we not spending proper amounts of time developing the skills in those areas? We do one lesson on the trading estate and we're out on the main road. That makes no sense at all. What the hell are we doing? And we're doing it because we feel that that's what the learner expects. We haven't asked them, we just assume. For most of them, that 11-mile-an-hour ride home with their knuckles white isn't fun at all.
No, definitely. And I actually recently had a session with a PDI where I had to bring up the fixing the setting the gas and then we kept stalling. I know. I'll wait for that episode with Chris Benstead. But it was happening. And it was interesting actually because the PDI said that's not how I do it. And actually, I quite often teach, preach, teach them what you do. And to be fair, she was. so we had to actually fix her driving a little bit and she'd learned a way around it, if that makes sense. She'd learned a way around it and wasn't obviously stalling at every single set of traffic lights, but she wasn't picking up on the fact that her pupil wasn't correctly setting the gas before getting the bite, and therefore was on occasion, not every time, but particularly when she wanted to move off a bit quicker, stalling. And I think it's that same sort of thing. It's like nipping that in the bud, working more on that, which will then help them with the other stuff because they're not having to worry about that and they can focus on, because I think actually another thing that she was trying to work on with the pupil in that moment was checking their mirrors before moving off at the traffic light, and not understanding why that wasn't happening. I was like, because their brain's on their feet, so get that competent and then their brains can be elsewhere. And so
it's a very interesting debate that currently, isn't it? Gas before bite before gas, because on a lot of modern cars you bring it to the bite and the engine revs anyway.
Yep.
So, but I've always taught bike then gas,
Okay.
and then I bring in gas then bike later, and then have them choose which way they do it, because I want my learners to be able to do it both ways.
Yeah, and I get, and I sort of kind of get what Chris was saying when we had that debate where it, like, if you're doing a maneuver, for example, and you've got a high powered car, then yes, you're probably not going to need gas in that moment, and probably shouldn't be applying gas in that moment. I think and this kind of comes down to the whole a coaching element, is allowing them to try each style and see the benefits and the disadvantages, and being aware of how it might be different in every car. Now, for example, this car that we were driving is quite a low powered, I think it's a Hyundai i10, sort of kind of low powered car. So you don't put gas in that car, it's stalling.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's important to recognize when we're teaching. If we've spent 40, 50 hours with pupil teaching them a particular way of doing their feet, it's very hard to then get into another car and change that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's making them aware that we're teaching them to drive all cars, not just the car we're in at that point. That's where I sort of kind of lean towards the set gas, find bike. Also, it's in the driving essentials.
Driving the essential skills says set the gas, find the bike.
Yeah.
But we also used to think the Earth was flat.
True. And I do agree that I think
in fact, some people still think it's flat.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, God, that has come back, hasn't it?
It has.
That's because of the internet. Basically, the internet allows crazy people to have a louder voice, like Chris Benstead. It's interesting actually, because I had this conversation, and we're fully going off topic here, but I had this conversation about reversing cameras. Now, my reversing camera is really good and really clear, and the driver search skills actually says take effective observations. So my argument actually is I get a better view of what's behind me in my camera than I do turning around, because I have quite a small back window and quite big blind spots at the back. So I look at that scenario and go, how is it best for me to, I still want to see everything. How is it best for me to see everything? And I need blind spot checks because it doesn't go wide enough and I can't see cars approaching from the side. But actually turning around, looking out the back window, I get a worse view than I do from the camera. So I'm wondering if the industry and DVSA particularly will change with times when it comes to things like cameras, because
it'd be difficult for them, wouldn't it, really? Because not all the cameras aren't going to be the same. That's the problem. And somebody will make one that's cheaper than somebody else's, and it won't have quite the view. It's tricky. I think I'm happy to let people use the cameras, but as long as most of their observation is to the rear, and you want to be checking your blind spots to the rear, so a scan round. But as long as most of your observation is that way, I think glancing forward at the camera is totally fine. I take the same line as I would do using mirrors. That's fine too. Glance at your mirrors, look back.
Yeah, the word for me is effective observation. So I think for me, it's about, did you know what was there? And that's the key, is like use what you can to get that information. And so it, like, sometimes, like, I don't know, people will probably know that some reversing cameras, you can get that wide angle view. So you can flick it into like a wide angle view. But if you're reversing out of somewhere, that camera's like 2 meters further back than you are.
So the reversing camera on my van is phenomenal.
Yeah,
it's absolutely phenomenal. But it's 140 degree.
So. Yeah. And that's what I mean. So it's like, it's bringing that in, that actually in that scenario, if you're reversing out of somewhere, like a blind, like a driveway or something, that camera is going to give you that information before that you could by looking over your shoulders. And so I think that definitely should be incorporated into the lesson of how are you best getting this information. And this comes back to talking to, we're massively going off on tangents here. Talking about mirrors, and I quite often talk about, when we're training mirrors, to not mention the word mirrors, and to talk about like looking for dangers. And again, if you put it in that sense, it doesn't become about a mirror check. It becomes about searching for the information, which often will be a mirror check, but sometimes is a blind spot check. Sometimes is looking.
I think it's we could really do with making a change to the way I think mirror signal, position, speed, gear, look is outdated. It's not a good system because you have to change it when you come to overtake. So if it was a solid system, it wouldn't need changing at all. If we switch to IPSCA, information, position, speed, gear, acceleration, which is what the advanced trainers use, then that never has to be modified. And information covers everything, and it runs throughout everything we do. So information, we take it, we use it, we give it. So what information do you need here? Is very different to which mirrors you're going to check. Because it's just that, I had a debate with somebody about stuff to remember, that it's not a good idea. And we were talking about junctions, and he'd said, if you don't know, don't go. He said, I don't want to fail there. That's what they fail on. We pulled out in front of somebody. What happened to if you don't know, don't go? So she forgot. Well, that's how powerful that is. She forgot. So you can't just have a whole lot of acronyms and little phrases for people to remember, because it's just more shit to remember. But if it's built into them, I need information here. And I like to pick a road, and I'll stop and I say, okay, tell me what you can see. Tell me what you can't see. Tell me what you might reasonably expect on this type of road, this type of day, this time of year. What would that be? And what if it doesn't pan out the way you're expecting? What's your plan? Where's your escape routes? Where's the softest things to hit? So it's by getting them to be more aware of the world that they're in and having plans to deal with potential, issues. I have this with my missus all the time. She gets upset because if I'm driving and I'm approaching something that's a bit more complicated, I zone her out. I don't hear what she's saying. What are you ignoring me? I'm concentrating on driving. We're going to get there alive. She'll happily carry on a conversation with me while she's driving. It drives me nuts. You need to be concentrating. You're not good enough to not concentrate. I might get away with it because I am a good driver. I've done a lot of advanced driver training, so I might get away with it. But she won't. But yet she's happy to take that risk. It drives me nuts. So I always drive. That's just the way it is.
It's interesting that actually, because I had a conversation with a ADI about that, and I'm sure everyone's had this pupil, the pupil that won't shut up, they're like really chatty, wants to tell you their life story, the entire thing, and have a good old chat. And to be fair, those pupils are great. It's good fun. The lessons fly by. And they were saying, how do I get them to shut up so they can concentrate on the driving? And actually, I pointed out, don't, because yes, you need to have moments where you're having conversations about the driving and stuff, but what you need to train this pupil to do is to learn to know when to shut up. Because if they're that chatty with you, what are they going to be like when they're driving with their friends? They're going to have they're just going to be blah, 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 all the way through.
Yeah, they're probably going to turn around and talk.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to actually, you've got a pupil here that's clearly like quite verbal and likes to have conversations. So train them like that. If you ever have a pupil you need to have a conversation with, that's the pupil, to train them how to know when to go, wait a minute, guys, deal with this, right? What we were talking about, and then carrying on, learning to put pause on the conversation.
But anyway, back. What were we talking about originally? Curriculums, curriculi. Is it curriculum?
No idea. So I just want to read a couple of these out and just to kind of see what you think about them. And some of them I'm just going to brush over because they we've kind of covered them already. So one of them says this is I do find this one interesting, and this runs throughout this unit, is identify the learning needs of the learner, their initial status, and any special needs including any for in-vehicle adaptation. Sorry, it's all weirdly laid out there. So obviously you're trying to find out if pupils have any special needs. I'm just going to move on a little bit because a little bit is sort of then says later on about incorporating parents. So it says, where appropriate, how to foster effective relationships with parents, guardians, partners, and carriers of learners with physical or cognitive disabilities. Now, I find that bit quite interesting. We've talked about incorporating parents, but here it actually specifically says for physical and cognitive disabilities. And I almost slightly don't agree with this, because I I get you should have that conversation in that situation, but you should have that conversation for all of your pupils. I remember listening to Sen podcast, which is one of the guys that Terry had on his Meganar, and he had a
special educational needs, just in case.
Okay, people don't know what Sen is. Yeah, sorry. The and he had a teacher on who specializes in Sen sort of kind of situations, and their conversation was amazing. It was about basically that teachers, and I include driving instructors in this, should be making all of their lessons available to anybody, because if what works for people with special educational needs works for everyone, because it's client centered. That's the key. Is you're making. So I wonder if the DVSA have missed a trick here in actually making that quite specific, and rather than just for all.
Well, I think that the key thing to remember, I think, really for me, is that the DVSA are not teachers, they're not trainers, they're assessors. Different world. I think we need to contract with every customer, and that includes all of this stuff. Okay, and I'll normally start with, okay, let's have a little look at how it's going to be. What we're going to do, how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it, why we're going to do it, and I'll say, so what is it you want from me? It's nearly always met with, I don't know, teach me to drive. Okay, well, how's that going to be though? Again, early stages, unless I've taught somebody to know, and I'll just get a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. I say, okay, this is the stuff that you want. Am I allowed to shout at you? No. Well, write it down then. No shouting. Well, if I can't shout at you, is it okay if I slap you if you make a mistake? No. And a bit of light-hearted stuff. And I always do this for free. It takes about 20 minutes. How about if you've made a mistake? What happens then? Am I okay to berate you? Or would you rather we maybe pulled up and had a conversation about what we're going to learn? And I'll go through it all. What happens if you're late? What happens if I'm late? What happens if I have to cancel? What happens if you cancel? What are the consequences there? How will that work? So I'll go through all of this. Are mom and dad going to get involved? Often they'll go, no. Well, who's paying for it? Well, the dad's paying for it. You think he has a right to be involved if he wants to be? Well, do you want to have that conversation? I should have that conversation with them. And we just go through it all so that everybody knows what's expected of them and what they can expect of the other person. And that's all part of it. How do you learn best? I remember having a conversation with a guy who was quite a long way along the spectrum. He'd said he wanted to plan the lessons. You want to, okay. So I sent him the LDC workbook, and he came back with a wodge of notes. And I looked at them, and they were really good. I said, wow, that's very good, very good. And we're about half an hour into the lesson, and he just absolutely and utterly lost the plot. Pulled over, handbrake on, jumped out of the car, shouting and screaming and swearing, and stamping up and down the footpath. I thought, what just happened there? He got back in. It's like, all right then, Nick, what? Can't explain to me what's just happened here? You missed a bit out. What? I didn't. You did. You just grabs the notes from me. Goes back several pages there. That was ages ago, mate. He said, yeah, but you said I could plan these lessons and you've not let me. I said, have you been annoyed since then? Yeah. Why didn't you say something? I didn't know I could. So we just hatched a plan between us. So I hadn't done a very good job there of actually setting the boundaries, because he should have known that if I say something that aggravates you, hey, just shout up there and we'll fix it. So by not really understanding properly what he needed from me, I gave him what I thought he needed. So it's vitally important, because I get asked this all the time from new instructors. Oh, I've got this new pupil that's got insert SEN here. What do I need to do? I said, well, you're going to need expert help. All right, where am I going to find that? Sat next to you. They've lived for 17 years with it. They know how it works, and they know what doesn't work, particularly. So hatch a plan. You might need to involve somebody else, but have that conversation to make your life and their life much, much easier.
Absolutely.
I think
I remember teaching a girl with autism recently, and that was exactly what we did. And actually, she went and did a presentation at her university, and the presentation was on how I'd trained her, because it was the first time in her life that someone had let her decide how it went, like what works for you. But this kind of brings me back to my point that we talk about it, and maybe people are just a little bit more aware of it when it comes to scent. But what everything you just described there, it could have worked with any pupil.
Absolutely,
because that's how they like. Everybody is different.
They are, and I do it that way.
Yeah.
I think this is why SEN pupils were always seen as troublesome in the past, because it's too much like hard work.
Yeah.
But we should be working that way all the time. That's how we remember we're charging money for this. So it should be hard work. You know, it shouldn't be what mum and dad can deliver. We shouldn't be selling that. We should be selling something above and beyond that, which is lessons geared to the individual, not the individual geared to the lesson. And that's a not very well veiled dig at those who say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do roundabouts for my standard check." Have you chosen your pupil yet? No, not yet. No. Brilliant. Well, that's bound to work well.
I think we've taken enough of your time, and I'm
You're
not
sick of listening to me now.
I'm not sure how long people are going to listen for. If you've made it this far, well done, guys.
If you've made it this far, well done, you.
Yeah. So, Bob, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you?
Client-centeredlearning.co.uk. I'm running a series of workshops at the minute. I think I prefer the Zoom workshop way of doing things, because it means I can. This sounds so bloody grandiose. I can help more people that way. There's a real lack of understanding of what's required. We, as an industry, we don't understand the standards yet. We don't understand the standard because we've not read it. You know, particular stuff like failure analysis. I had a little gaggle of guys together on the last one, and they'd all failed, and none of them understood why. They'd sort of had it explained to them a bit, and they'd had conversations with their trainers, but they didn't know why they were marked that way, and why getting a low mark in that box means getting a low mark in several other boxes. And you think, well, if this is what you do for a living, you need to understand it more. You need to know how you're being assessed, because you can never properly meet the criteria if you don't know what it is. So I'm running loads of those workshops. You can find those on pdiadi.com. I've partnered with them because it means they do all the admin and I just turn up and do the workshops, which suits me just fine in this era of alleged semi-retirement.
Yeah, you've not done a good job of retiring.
No.
So just before I get one final top tip from you, because I've been asking everyone to leave a top tip, I'll just let everyone know where they can find me. So you can find me at Cowley's Instructor Training on Facebook, or you can find me at theinstructortrainer.com, or just find me on Facebook, basically. I'm also on Lou's PDI group as an admin, and we support lots of PDIs on that group. So yeah, go join that group. So Bob, what I forgot to pre-warn you about this, but I'm sure you'll have one at the top of your head. What is if you had one top tip to give to PDIs, ADIs, what would that be?
Stop being a dick on Facebook. No, I'm only kidding. No, I'm not kidding about that. Stop being a dick on Facebook. I think it's see if you can find more coaching inside of you. It's in there. It just wants to get out. And if you want to see how powerful it is and how clever your learners are, next time you're going to do a maneuver from scratch, get them to imagine it, and then say to them after they've finished imagining it, I'm going to keep you safe now, so no matter what happens, it can't go wrong. Execute what you just imagined. And then if it's not going the way that you're expecting, just stop them and just say, is this what you imagined? No. Well, what's different about it? Okay, what's your options? And just see how smart your learners are. So coaching has not only changed my working life, it's changed my life. That sounds very grand, doesn't it? But it has. I look at life a different way now. I'm nowhere near as curmudgeonly as I used to be. I'm less Victor Meldrewish. My missus would probably tell you otherwise, but
That's the title.
Will that do for a top tip?
That's the title for the podcast. Not Victor Meldrew. um, okay, brilliant. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for listening. And please subscribe and keep listening to more of the podcast. We've got some more great trainers, including Chris Benstead, who we talked about briefly. Is going to be coming on. So yeah, thank you everyone.
Cowley's Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops.